The disaster movie genre is notorious for its recurring cliches and familiar tropes, such as iconic landmarks being destroyed in spectacular fashion, corrupt officials scheming behind the scenes, a conspiracy theorist who is initially dismissed but ultimately vindicated, and pets somehow surviving the widespread chaos and destruction. One particularly common and interesting trope is that the main character is almost always depicted as divorced or going through a difficult divorce. This isn't just a random storytelling choice. Disaster films frequently pair large-scale, global catastrophe with a deeply personal emotional journey, where the protagonist is not only trying to save the world, but also striving to heal or salvage his fractured family relationships amidst the chaos. This trope is so prevalent and compelling that I've compiled a detailed list of 12 disaster movies that exemplify the divorced dad storyline in various ways. For each film, I evaluate its overall quality with a comprehensive score. And I also assign a divorce meter rating, which specifically measures how well the divorced dad trope is integrated into the narrative, whether it feels natural and integral to the story or forced and superficial, and how well the protagonist's relationships, especially with an ex-spouse or estranged child, are developed and portrayed throughout the film. Sometimes the focus is primarily on the ex-wife and the lingering emotional tension there. Other times, it's more about reconnecting with a child or attempting to repair a broken bond. The ratings I use employ the popular Letterboxd 5-star system, and you can find links to my profile and the full ranked list in the description below. We'll start the countdown at the bottom with the worst portrayal of this trope, and move upward toward the best, highlighting how each film handles the balance between disaster spectacle and personal drama. It's worth noting that a film might have a high overall rating for its action or effects, but receive a low divorce dad score if that element feels weak or underdeveloped, or vice versa. Please don't take any critiques personally. It's all just an analytical breakdown of how these storytelling elements function within the genre. At the 1.5-star tier sits Geostorm, 2017, which unfortunately has the worst divorced dad trope on this entire list. Set in the near future, the film follows the story of a malfunctioning satellite network that threatens to unleash a catastrophic global geostorm. Directed by Dean Devlin, who is a frequent collaborator of Roland Emmerich and often employs similar archetypes, the film nonetheless fails on all fronts. The destruction sequences are weak and uninspired, and the plot is confusing and convoluted to the point of frustration. I've gone into much more detail about why this movie is such a disappointment in a separate video, because honestly, it's just that bad and doesn't deserve to be overlooked. In this film, the divorced father figure is portrayed by Gerard Butler as Jake Lawson, who is intended to be the hero of the story. Unfortunately, this trope is poorly executed here because the character's divorced status barely influences the plot or his personal development. His ex-wife remains completely silent throughout the film, and his daughter appears only briefly at the beginning and again at the very end, offering little depth or emotional resonance. The movie underwent extensive reshoots during which the role of the ex-wife was recast, suggesting that the divorce subplot may have originally played a more significant role, but was largely removed in the revision process. This theory makes sense because, as it stands, the divorce element feels tacked on and superficial, serving more as a background detail rather than a meaningful factor in the story. This underutilization of the divorced dad trope results in a disappointing and ineffective narrative choice, earning it a low rating of 1.5 stars and an equally low score on the divorce meter. Moving on to a slightly better example within the 2-star category. The 1997 disaster film Volcano revolves around a volcanic eruption in downtown Los Angeles and follows a city official and a seismologist trying to mitigate the disaster. While the film contains entertaining destruction scenes, its themes are heavy-handed and cliched, and the characters lack depth, often feeling like mere afterthoughts. Despite this, the movie manages to keep viewers mildly engaged, though it fails to leave a lasting impact, partly due to an overcrowded cast that the limited runtime cannot adequately develop. Here, the divorced father is Tommy Lee Jones' character, Mike Roark, who is focused less on the dynamics of his marriage and more on rescuing his daughter from the dangerous volcanic eruption. Unfortunately, the daughter is underdeveloped as a character and primarily serves as a plot device to motivate Mike's heroics. The ex-wife is absent from the storyline, and the divorce itself is not a significant plot point, resulting in a modest 3-star rating but a low divorce relevance rating of 2. Following that, we have The Day After Tomorrow, a 2004 film directed by Roland Emmerich, which tells the story of Jack Hall, a paleoclimatologist, who embarks on a perilous journey from Washington, D.C. to New York City to save his son amid a catastrophic and sudden global storm that triggers a new ice age. My feelings about this movie are rather lukewarm. It is a typical disaster film that doesn't particularly stand out. While Jake Gyllenhaal's character is somewhat engaging, I found it difficult to connect with the other leads. And Dennis Quaid's performance did not resonate with me, compounded by a rather dull plot. The movie does, however, excel in visual effects, which is a definite highlight. The question of whether Jack is divorced is not clearly addressed, but it seems he and his wife are estranged, living apart, which justifies its inclusion on this list. The storyline focuses on Jack's emotional and physical effort to reunite with his son after a falling out, culminating in a heartfelt reconciliation by the end of the film. This touching moment adds some emotional weight to the disaster narrative, earning the film 3 stars and a 2 on the divorce meter. Moonfall, a 2022 film by Roland Emmerich, lands in the 2.5-star category, presenting a wildly strange premise where a mysterious force knocks the moon out of its orbit, setting it on a catastrophic collision course with Earth. The movie's concept is utterly insane, populated by characters who are nothing more than walking cliches. Most attempts at humor fall flat, and the dialogue is painfully cheesy. However, the film does offer some visually impressive destruction scenes, though many suffer from poor CGI effects. Roland Emmerich, known for his over-the-top style, amps up the typical disaster movie family drama by featuring not just a divorced dad, but also a divorced mom, played by Patrick Wilson and Halle Berry respectively, both of whom have children. Unfortunately, their story arcs are extremely dull. The narrative focuses less on Wilson's character reuniting with his ex-wife, and more on reconnecting with his estranged son. Despite attempts to inject emotional depth, these moments failed to resonate with me, leaving me indifferent to their plight. Overall, Wilson's portrayal of the divorced dad is serviceable but shallow, reflecting the film's overall laziness. I rate it 1.5 stars with a 2.5 on the divorce meter. Moving into the 3-star tier, Outbreak, a 1995 movie, follows a group of army doctors racing against time to find a cure for a deadly virus that is spread from Africa to a small town in California. The film didn't fully engage me. The best parts involved the interactions between Morgan Freeman and Donald Sutherland, while the main cast felt uninspiring. I wasn't a fan of Dustin Hoffman's performance, finding much of his dialogue awkwardly cheesy, which conflicted with the movie's serious tone. Hoffman plays Sam Daniels, a recently separated father of 2 dogs, estranged from his wife Robbie, played by Renee Russo. The divorced dad storyline fell short for me, mainly because the chemistry between the actors felt unconvincing, and the dialogue about their past was weak. Nonetheless, the character arc was sufficiently developed, and I appreciated that Robbie was portrayed as a fully fleshed-out character. The couple somewhat reconciles by the film's end, when Sam discovers a cure that saves her, though the resolution isn't as gratifying as it might have been. It's not a bad movie, just rather underwhelming. I give it 2.5 stars and a 3 on the divorce meter. Next up is Armageddon, the 1998 film directed by Michael Bay, which tells the story of an unlikely team of deep-core drillers recruited by NASA to save Earth after discovering that a Texas-sized asteroid will collide with the planet in less than a month. Armageddon is undeniably silly, but it's also incredibly entertaining, a perfect guilty pleasure to watch when you're a few beers in or just looking for some over-the-top fun. The movie is goofy and often nonsensical, but it balances that with massive explosions, straightforward humor, and easily relatable characters who bring a surprising amount of heart to the chaotic storyline. Normally, I'm not a fan of the advice to shut your brain off and enjoy the movie, but Armageddon practically exemplifies that idea, inviting viewers to embrace its absurdity. The film's main character is Bruce Willis's Harry S. Stamper, a divorced dad whose wife left him and their daughter, Grace, when she was very young, leaving Harry to raise her alone. At the start of the movie, Grace falls in love, sparking the familiar story of a daughter growing up and a father struggling to let go. This dynamic and emotional arc is fairly standard and has been seen in countless other films. It doesn't delve deeply into the divorce itself or focus on repairing a broken relationship. It's a low-key portrayal of divorce, more like a background detail than a central theme. In fact, if Harry's wife had been deceased instead, the story would likely have played out the same way, much like typical narratives seen in movies such as Hotel Transylvania. The film also includes a few touching moments that hint at the father-daughter bond, strengthening despite the looming disaster, giving the characters a bit of depth beneath the surface-level action. The plot's emphasis remains firmly on the mission to prevent the asteroid impact, with the family drama serving as emotional motivation rather than the main focus. On the divorce meter, it scores a 3, and I'd give the movie an overall 3-star rating. While it may not be a cinematic masterpiece, Armageddon succeeds as a high-energy, crowd-pleasing spectacle that combines humor, sentimentality, and thrilling action sequences in a way that keeps audiences hooked from start to finish, making it a memorable and enduring entry in the disaster movie genre. Next up is the 2012 film 2012, once again directed by Roland Emmerich. The story centers on a frustrated writer who fights to keep his family intact amid a series of catastrophic events that threaten to wipe out humanity. In my view, the movie is a mixed bag. The first half is engaging, especially the build-up to the disaster and the initial massive earthquakes, which are quite thrilling for a disaster film, featuring exciting action and impressive CGI. However, once the characters reach the mountains, the story loses its grip. Frankly, it becomes hard to care. The entire third act feels weak and strays from what made the first 2 hours enjoyable. Additionally, the film feels overly long. To me, this movie represents the pinnacle of what I call the Roland Emmerich divorced dad universe, hitting every trope related to that archetype almost perfectly. The lead, John Cusack's Jackson Curtis, embodies the classic role, a disheveled, struggling father trying to reconnect with his kids while dealing with financial hardships. But when the apocalypse arrives, he rises to the challenge, displaying near superhuman determination, especially when driving. The new boyfriend initially appears to be an unsympathetic character, but over the course of the film, he redeems himself by saving the family multiple times. Yet for some puzzling reason, he is given a brutal and painful death, and the ex-wife doesn't even shed a tear, which felt odd. This plot point paves the way for Jackson to reunite with his wife, and by the film's end, they restore their family's happiness. While I believe the movie could have benefited from more backstory about their relationship, as it remains vague and their reconciliation feels somewhat forced, it still effectively employs the trope and earns its spot in this tier. I'd rate it 2 stars overall, but it scores a 3.5 on what I call the divorce meter. Moving on to the 4-star tier, we have Greenland, a 2020 film about a family struggling to survive as a planet-destroying comet approaches Earth. This movie stands out as the best disaster film, featuring Gerard Butler as a man in a troubled relationship with his wife. Although the only real competition is Geostorm, making it an easier win, Greenland is a solid film. The family dynamic is compelling, the acting is strong, and the depiction of destruction is suitably intense. The film loses some momentum in the final act, and the plot meanders a bit, but it remains an enjoyable watch for fans of the genre. Gerard Butler's character, John Garrity, fits the divorced dad trope, though divorced isn't entirely accurate, since he and his wife are technically still married, but separated after a rough patch. The emotional arc of the movie centers on their reconciliation, proving that nothing like an apocalyptic threat can save a marriage quite like impending doom. This portrayal of the trope is well executed, making the audience empathize with the couple's struggles and appreciate their renewed love. I'd give it 3 stars overall and a 4 on the divorce meter. Next up is San Andreas, a 2015 disaster film centered on a rescue helicopter pilot named Ray Gaines, portrayed by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. who embarks on a harrowing and perilous journey with his ex-wife across the vast and varied landscapes of California to save their daughter after a catastrophic earthquake of unprecedented magnitude devastates the state. Initially, I had fairly low expectations for this film, assuming it would fall into the typical mold of big-budget disaster movies characterized by over-the-top special effects and shallow storytelling, especially given Johnson's reputation for action-heavy but sometimes thinly plotted films. However, I was pleasantly surprised to find that San Andreas delivers some genuinely solid and thrilling action sequences that keep the intensity high and maintain a gripping pace throughout much of the movie. Beyond the explosions and destruction, the film attempts to ground itself emotionally by exploring the strained but enduring family dynamics at its core, with a few moments that feel surprisingly heartfelt and sincere amid the chaos. Despite these strengths, the movie still struggles with many of the genre's common pitfalls, such as cliched dialogue, predictable plot turns, and somewhat underdeveloped supporting characters, which ultimately prevent it from rising above being a moderately entertaining but largely forgettable disaster flick. One notable highlight is the inclusion of Paul Giamatti, one of my favorite actors, who brings a touch of gravitas and subtle humor to the film, although sadly, his character is underutilized and his subplot feels somewhat disconnected from the main storyline, leaving potential unexplored. Johnson's character, Ray, is portrayed as a divorced father who maintains a strong and loving bond with his daughter Blake, and manages to keep a cordial, if complicated, relationship with his soon-to-be ex-wife Emma. The couple is in the midst of divorcing at the film's outset, but gradually reconnects through their shared ordeal, culminating in a satisfying and emotionally resonant happy ending. The film also introduces Emma's new boyfriend, who initially appears as a decent and supportive figure, but soon reveals his true selfish and cowardly nature by abandoning Ray's daughter during the earthquake's chaos, only to meet a memorably grim fate when he is crushed by a shipping container shortly thereafter. A moment that adds a darkly ironic twist to his character arc. What sets this film apart from many other disaster movies is its focus on the protagonist's familial relationships, which are explored with more depth and emotional authenticity than usual, making their conflicts, struggles, and eventual reconciliation feel genuine and impactful. The chemistry between the lead actors helps convey the complexity of their emotions, adding layers to what could have been a standard action flick. Overall, while San Andreas may not reinvent the disaster genre or leave a lasting impression, it offers enough excitement and heart to warrant a viewing, and I give it 2.5 stars, as well as a 4 on the divorce meter, for its portrayal of broken but ultimately healing family bonds. At the top of the 5-star category is Twister, a 1996 disaster film about two storm chasers on the brink of divorce who must work together to develop an advanced weather alert system by chasing tornadoes. Despite some predictability, Twister is a knockout with an excellent score, impressive effects, a strong cast, and a mostly solid storyline. The central couple, Bill Paxton's Bill and Helen Hunt's Joe, aren't officially divorced, and Bill isn't a father, but Joe shares equal screen time and importance as a fully developed character. Their dynamic is authentic and electric, with no villain, both flawed, making their interaction compelling. Normally indifferent to romance, I found myself rooting for them to reconcile. Overall, Twister is the best example of the divorced dad trope in a disaster movie, earning 4 stars and a 5 rating on the divorce meter. That wraps up my list. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.